You're listening to The Outcue, a 21 News journalist perspective on a top news story.
Good morning. It is Thursday, May 29th, 2025. I'm Assistant News Director Justin Mitchell, and this is The Outcue. It was 1 year ago this week when an otherwise calm afternoon in downtown Youngstown was shattered by an explosion at the Realty Building that left one person dead, several injured, and many more without their homes. Since then, the building's been demolished. Several lawsuits have been filed against the building's owners, Greenheart Properties, along with Enbridge Gas and many others, and plans are slowly starting to emerge for what happens next on this now vacant lot. As we look back, we also want to look forward, and that's been the angle that we've been trying to take here this week at 21 News. So what we're going to do this month for the Outcue is speak to three different reporters who've got stories this week looking at different angles based on new information, either new information that came out about that day or a look ahead at where we stand now, what has changed and what has not changed. So up first with me is Kaitlyn McCarthy. Now, Kaitlyn, your story aired last night, and we'll start with that. You went back through the transcripts. It was just last week that the NTSB released volumes of documents based upon their initial investigation. Now, to be clear, so that nobody misconstrues, they don't assign blame. That is not what the NTSB does, and there will be a final report that may still be another 6 to 12 months or more down the road. But they do shed a lot more light on what led up to that gas line being cut. So I want you to talk about that. What have you found out in all of what you've read?
Yeah, so this really focused on all the perspectives going from starting, with the city. They also did interviews with people from Greenheart, as well as doing just interviews with anybody that was involved, including the person that cut that line. So we really got all of their perspectives leading up to when the explosion happened. But what made it very interesting is each of the interviews, they actually were very similar, saying very similar things. But they all were it seems like they were just assuming that this pipe was not active or that there were no, usable pipes at this point. And they really focused on that, asking questions, and every single person had that same exact thing. The guy who cut it, he was telling the NTSB reporters that essentially he was given permission to cut this. So when he got the permission to cut it from the superintendent that was on the job at the time, he thought that would be okay, and that's when the explosion happened. The superintendent that was on the site at the time agreed with this. He said that was the case in this situation, that he did, allow him to cut out any of the pipes, but it was just kind of assumed from everybody that spoke and did any kind of walkthroughs of the building that none of these pipes were active. They were all just old pipes. And that's really the conclusion that, reading all of those interviews, you really come to.
So take us through a little bit of who they spoke to, because I thought there was a lot of new information there. We knew that there was a scrap crew that was part of who was hired. But take me through, the city hires Greenheart, even though they had used other companies for all the other work. This particular part of the project is behind schedule. Chuck Shasho, the Deputy Director of Public Works, personally meets with Brian Angelilli from Greenheart. They decide it's best for everybody involved if they just handle the work in their own business or the basement of their own business, even though this line actually goes out under the sidewalk and really is not their property, but the city's property. So they award them the work without a contract and without any bidding.
Yes.
And then Greenheart hire this scrap crew.
Yes.
So who are all these people? And be a little more specific about what each one of them said.
Okay, so going back to the city, obviously Chuck Shasho is the one that was speaking with Brian Angelilli. He is the owner for Greenheart Properties, kind of giving him the chance to come up with almost like his own proposal in a way, just to kind of do this, because they were behind on the work that was being done at the Realty Building for the Smart 2 project. So they said, well, you guys can just, clear this out, and then we'll fill it in afterwards. We can, kind of work through this together. And so Brian Angelilli, they did some tours with some of the people that, were going to be working, but Greenhart's not the one that was down in the basement doing that work that day. That was actually somebody that they subcontracted out that was they were a scrap metal crew, and they were trying to, take some of the pipes out and stuff, and they were loading it into a truck to take it over to get some money for it, and pretty much they were letting them do that, and that was how they were going to help clean it out before this vault, well, that's what would be underneath the sidewalk, was filled in.
So the city's doing the Smart 2 road project.
Correct.
They know they've got all these underground vaults that need filled in for part of the project. And because they're behind on this project, they say, listen, we need you to do the work. We need the work done under your building. You guys have people who do this kind of work. You've done at least something kind of similar with the Gallagher building where they had to fill in a vault.
Yes.
So you might as well be the ones to do the work. Does the city ask Greenhart specifically to cut this pipe, or is the pipe not discussed?
The pipe had no discussion. There was just assumptions.
Right.
The whole thing was, it was just unspoken of the entire time. And people just assumed, they're like, well, it was, out of the area, or we just didn't, see it. I mean, there was different perspectives saying different things in that area, but no, it was never discussed by anybody.
So then Greenhart hires this Marcel Williams, is this scrapper, who's working essentially for free. He's working for whatever he can get for the metal he takes out. They say, we don't want it, so you come take whatever you can take and you get what you get. He expected to make about $100.
Yeah.
He hires two guys, Edward Bean and Taylor Botsford, who are recently released inmates who are trying to make a go of it. They need some steady work. They say they've worked for Marcel's crew before. They don't cut the line. Marcel cuts the line.
Yes.
But who had been down there in the weeks prior and surveying and saying what the work was? I mean, we're talking, the city and Greenhart and an architect.
Yeah, Brian Angelilli too. I mean, they all did walkthroughs of the entire basement, and that includes the superintendent too, the one that said that any of these could be cut, and it was just unspoken of with this gas line. Essentially, they just assumed that everything in there was dead and that nothing was active, so anything was good up for grabs.
So every person from Chuck Shasho to Brian Angelilli to Jim, his last name is Jim Carson from Greenhart, to Marcel, to the scrap crew, they're all aware of this gas line. They all believe it to be dead.
Yep.
Nobody checked.
Nope. It was all assumptions at that point. So moving forward, that's pretty much the big takeaway from the big thing of papers that we had.
And when we say a big thing of papers, we're talking each one of these interviews is about 60, 70 pages, if not more. So this is a lot to go through.
Absolutely.
But that was the common denominator, right? They all said, well, it was not my responsibility, but it was dead. And they didn't know why they knew it was dead. They just had been told somewhere, they seem to recall.
Well, from my perspective of even just reading it, it was almost like reading the same interview in a lot of cases over and over again, which was, it really was when it came there.
Now, the NTSB doesn't make any recommendations, as we said here, so I don't really have any idea what steps come next.
Yeah.
But did any of them at least indicate that in the future, this should be handled differently, this type of work?
Oh yeah, that was actually the question that NTSB asked everybody at the end of the interview. And yeah, no, a lot of them were saying that more things need to be out in the open and discussed in the future. And a lot of those were similar too. There was only a couple people that really didn't give an answer, but all of the ones that did, very similar answer again. So it was like, kind of rereading that same situation.
And nobody just took responsibility and said, this is I mean, fault's a strong word, but yeah, I mean, I guess no one said, I'll take responsibility for this.
Absolutely not. No, it was, like I said, everyone was saying somebody else's name, and then it was all assumptions from there.
Kaitlyn, thank you. Your report aired last night. It's available on our app and online now. And up next, we'll talk to Sydney Canty, who has spoken on the phone with Brian Angelilli. To my knowledge, the first time that Angelilli's spoken to any media since this has happened, about what the baby steps are for what might come next at the site of the former Realty Building. So we'll be right back with Sydney. All right, we're back. So Sydney, Your piece airs tonight, and you're taking a look at what's next for downtown and how everybody's recovered and what the next steps are. And you actually spoke, I believe for the first time, that Brian Angelilli has spoken to any media. Now, on the phone, he declined to do an on-camera interview, but still, he had a fair amount to say. So just, what's he telling you?
Well, he declined that on-air interview because he says that all of the information is a little bit
Preliminary.
Yes, it's very preliminary. It's not set in stone yet. But basically what they're looking at and what they want to do is to have another commercial property on the bottom and then another, residential structure on the top. But he says that the surrounding businesses would have to be okay with that. And so it's taking a lot of time to kind of plan this. He said it's a process and that we're just not at that point yet, was his, quote. And I asked you, well, why not? It's taking, and he said, well, it just really takes time. We have to get the renderings done. The renderings being drawings. Like he likened it to like a blueprint. Like getting the drawings together so they can see exactly what the structure would look like, what the cost analysis of that would be, if they can actually build something that would actually sell and make money for, the city of Youngstown, but also for, this owner. And so I brought some of those ideas that he had to some of the businesses, even that were affected when this happened, the ones that were right next door. I tried to speak with the Chase Bank, but they told me I had to go through their media person, so that didn't work out. But then I went over to the DoubleTree and I went over to Mark Canzanetta's place, Casa di Canzanetta, and I was able to speak to those two establishments. Canzanetta had a lot to say. In the beginning, I'm going very fast here, it seems. I'm going to slow down so the viewers and listeners can actually understand me. In the beginning, Canzanetta was very critical of a lot that was going on downtown. He admitted that. He said, I was very critical of the administration, and I still am, were his words. But because he says he wants there to be a lot of economic development in the area, and he wants things to be done in a way that everybody benefits. So what he would like to see, he wouldn't care if it was another residential area or if it was some other type of commercial structure, but what he really wants to see is parking. He said at least maybe 2 parking decks and then maybe the residential on top, because everybody's fighting for parking down here, and that's, become quite an issue. He also wants there to be some kind of a vigil or some type of memorial set up for Akil Drake. He says, we're at the 1-year mark now, and I haven't seen anything about that. That young man lost his life. And it's not that it seems like no one cares, but nobody's putting that out there. Like, hey, this is where this happened, and he deserves this.
And by nobody, he means nobody with the city,
right,
correct?
Right, yes. And so, he was just laying out some of the things that he would like to see, happen next door, and even for the economic development in this downtown area. There's also a person who I spoke with at the DoubleTree who says that she too would like to see a parking structure. That seems to be kind of the common theme of what a lot of these places around here want to see, is places for people to park so that when they're down here shopping or eating or whatever, they can do that comfortably. Don't have to worry about trying to find a spot or getting a ticket or getting towed. And so that's a really big thing for them. They also, the DoubleTree representative that I spoke to also wants to see more residential areas at the top. She said that they miss very much their residential partners, that they miss those, she called them neighbors, that they would bring their families there and have them stay there. They had a good relationship with them. There were more people around. There was more foot traffic. And so they want to see that kind of a thing back. And so Brian Angelilli is trying to do that, but all of it, it's a very uncertain process. He also told me that he would work hand in hand with the city once those renderings were finished and complete, and then they could go from there on how they can do this maybe even together. So,
with regard to how Angelilli says that he wants the surrounding area, the neighbors, to be happy with whatever he's doing, did he go any further than that? Well, I guess I should ask this question in reverse. Did anybody you spoke to have any reservations about it being another Angelilli project? I mean, given what we know about nobody having checked the line, including Greenheart. Not only Greenheart, but they didn't check the gas line either.
And I thought that would be an issue, but both of them, the Lise Canzanetta and the DoubleTree representative, they both were saying no. They don't have any, concerns that something like this would happen again, or that there are any dangers or anything like that, because they said this situation was such a big one. They think that now the city and the owner will be much more mindful about ever allowing it to happen again.
And then what I was going to say first was Angelilli, did he indicate if there was opposition that would essentially act as a veto on his plans, or would he continue to work with them until they were comfortable with something?
So he didn't get into that, but he was very, I'd say, adamant on wanting to make sure that he does not cause this community any harm, any ill will, and that he wants to just work with the city, the neighbors, and the business in this area to make this kind of become something that works not just for him but for everybody, just in the area of economic development. He told me that they are going to start the meetings with the architects in mid to late summer.
Okay.
So that's when we might be able to start hearing something about what he's doing with the city, what the blueprint looks like, how much it's going to cost, what exactly it's going to be. What he wants to do is the commercial and the residential, but we don't know 100% for sure if that is what it's going to be.
Right, certain projects
yes,
can change.
Right.
Well, I'm sure that since you apparently have the magic touch and can get him to answer the phone, that you'll stay in touch, and I hope that we get some updates in the near future, and that we keep on this and continue to get whatever feedback there is from the residents and from the city, and we'll keep both talking to them and applying pressure where necessary. In the final segment of this Outcue, we'll be back in just a moment with Madison Tromler. She's revisiting her 101 West special from last year, where we looked at the regulations for natural gas lines and whether or not we're any safer today than we were when this happened, and what movements might be in place to try and make that so. So we'll be right back. And finally, we've got Madison Tromler, whose piece will air tomorrow, and we'll take a look at the regulations that are meant to keep us safe, where they failed last year, and whether we've made any progress. So Madison, your piece is essentially a follow-up to the 101 West special that we did, looking at the regulation or lack thereof when it comes to gas pipelines. So now you're looking to essentially update that. Are we any safer now? Has anything changed, particularly with a new administration in Washington and a lot of these regulations being federal? What are you finding?
Yeah, so I mean, from what we saw in the beginning, there really was, like you just mentioned, a lot of lack of regulations and a lot of loopholes that really allowed this to happen, and just not a lot of strict guidelines for the people who are working around natural gas lines with, as we know, third-party workers, and just not a lot of requirements to have a license, for example, to be an excavator, and just a lot of different loopholes in the law that really was a concern to experts out there, and are the main causes that lead to these natural gas explosions is human error. So that was the big thing. And as I'm now working on this report to kind of see what has changed, I'm not seeing much specific changes in the regulation. The NTSB is continuing to work on their investigation, and they likely will have recommendations. And they've pointed that in recent other natural gas explosions that they've investigated, they have had new recommendations, but in terms of from this specific one, and they haven't said that has come out yet. But I'm also in touch with Ohio 811 and FSMA, which is the federal agency, and they have some efforts underway, and they're trying to make some changes, but nothing really tangible has been changed yet. But I actually, if that's okay, printed out, because I've been in touch with the Ohio 811, the Call Before You Dig people, and they did say that the state is working with House Representative Monica Robb Blasdell and House Rep Mark Johnson. They have introduced House Bill 227, and they said that's the first step to begin addressing a number of things that we talked about last year to enhance Ohio's excavation laws as they exist today. So this was a response I got when I was initially working on this report. And so there's efforts, because even when I spoke with Ohio 811's executive director last year, he was candid about his concerns with the excavation issues, and also the fact that Ohio has never had standard construction laws to build or to install gas lines in a consistent way. So those are things that they're trying to get updated policies for.
So, and the reason that's important is because the NTSB will issue recommendations, as you mentioned, but as we learned from East Palestine, that's all they are recommendations. They would need then some entity, some agency to act on those recommendations.
Right. And it's really, my understanding from doing the report last year is it's really up to the states. So, someone like Roger Lipscomb, who works for Ohio 811, is very important in this because he's someone who holds a lot of power in the state to really push for these laws because he works for Ohio 811 and they work very closely with the gas operating companies.
Well, what are some of the changes they want to see? I mean, what's a big thing? I know you mentioned excavation. Now, with the Realty Building, we've discovered every single person involved did just assume this line was dead, and they didn't need any kind of permits or anything because it wasn't considered excavation. It wasn't really. It was filling in a basement, essentially.
Well, a big thing that he talked about that he wanted to see was requiring natural gas detectors in all buildings and homes. Making that a requirement was something that he talked about. And I talked a few minutes ago about how he does believe that there should be mandated construction laws so that the gas lines stay consistent. And also better laws for abandoning a line, which, I mean, I probably should have said that one first because that's so important in this situation because there was, especially as we've just learned with their new findings, there was a lot of confusion over whether this line was dead or not.
Right.
So, and there's, I mean, this is getting nitty gritty, but there's a difference between abandoning a line and then there being a line that's out of service. So, having established not only established process, but requirements for abandoning lines is something that many states, including Ohio, could do a lot better with. So that was something that he was pushing for. But it was really the main things that we discussed in our report. And also having better records of the natural gas lines and doing a better job of essentially keeping track of them, which is, even if that was required, though, by law, it is difficult to do just because oftentimes the companies may not even know that there's some gas lines that exist because they go back to the early 1800s when this country started being built. And they start, and every time there's new homes, new businesses that continue to pop up all over our country, they add more of these natural gas lines. And we don't know what's, that was the danger beneath us. We don't know what's down there. And that's what Roger, I remember him saying specifically, he was like, most of the times people don't even know what's beneath them. He said that himself. And he had a lot of experience, working in the industry and said, yeah, it is a concern and it's a challenge to regulate these things, but it's up to the states to really push for that.
As opposed to federal legislation, it's really a state-by-state patchwork.
Yes, federally they have minimum guidelines that you follow, but they sort of look to the states to implement them further. That's just the way it is.
Well, that being the case, though, this bill that's being worked on with Monica Robb Blasdell and you said who was the other?
Mark Johnson.
I'm curious. I don't know a lot about Mark Johnson. Is he also a Republican?
I'm so sorry, but I do.
That's fine. No, I didn't anticipate asking you that. The reason I'm getting at that, Monica Robb Blasdell is, and the reason I'm getting at that is that sometimes legislation dies due to lack of movement, due to partisanship. Ohio has a supermajority on the Republican side, and so I mentioned earlier a new administration in Washington, which it's not a secret is not one that likes to add regulations. But if we're talking at the state level, if there's a Republican effort in a supermajority Republican state, there may be more of an appetite for it to pass than there would be if it was in the minority party.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a good point. And they also said that in terms of standards that have been in effect in Ohio, the OUDPC, which is the Ohio Underground Damage Prevention Coalition that they work, that is Ohio 811 is a part of. is continuing to work on regulations regarding abandonment procedures and record keeping for the buried utilities. So nothing, has happened yet, but they say continues to be efforts for that.
So, I mean, to sum it up, nothing has really changed since
Right.
last year, but there is potentially some movement at the state level to tighten up some regulation, because as it stands, that gas line was on the wall and there was improper or incomplete bookkeeping from Enbridge or Dominion before them,
Right.
and everybody else making an assumption.
And I wanted to mention another big thing in HB 227, the one we were just discussing. It would eliminate the blanket exemptions for government entities working less than 12 inches in the right of way, she says. So that could help from a pipe, because right now there's exemptions for that.
Meaning what? Like if they're not going more than a foot into the ground?
Yes, there's yeah, exactly. So they are pushing for that, she says, in HB 227. So there's efforts based on everything we've discussed, and maybe HB 227 it could pass, and if these exemptions were to change. But I think also, as we've reported in the past, not just with natural gas lines, but with even railroad regulations and stuff. A lot of times there has to be that accountability. Because we know companies like gas companies, whether it's a rail company, a gas company, they're multi-million or billion-dollar companies. So if they're being fined for not following these laws, like there really has to be accountability, not just for third-party workers, but also for the companies to make sure they are following. If there is an abandonment process that becomes in place and required by law, there needs to be that real assurance that it's being followed. Because I think, we'll find that things are regulated, but in a sense, some say, well, there's deregulation if it's not being adhered to, or if it's not certainly required that you must follow it. So, but we're finding with the natural gas lines, it's just not even in there. Like, there is,
And it allows for this sort of a perfect storm that we had with Realty, where this was questionably marked. Even the books, if anybody had checked, they still may not have found that was an active line. And then that's compounded by the fact that nobody actually checked and they all just assumed it was okay to cut.
Right. Yeah. Because what we found was, even if they would have checked, it still wouldn't have worked out. And they didn't. And the gas company, as we just found out, didn't know. They said they weren't even aware that they were cutting into the line. So yeah, there's so many different, and they weren't required to call 811, as we learned at that point.
So while we're not to the point where we can assign any sort of blame, much like the NTSB, I think what we've learned from all of our coverage this week and the year leading up to now is that there really appears to have been multiple failures. As we just said, the records for the gas company may not have indicated that this line was not dead. Nobody bothered to check. Nobody bothered to say that they planned on cutting a line. It was all just sort of loosely done. And this is the puzzle piece that we've been trying to put together for the past year or so. And we'll continue to do that. And if there's anything else that you ever want us to look into, you reach us at news@wfmj.com, watchdog@wfmj.com. You can call our newsroom at 330-744-8821. You can reach us on Facebook. You can reach us on Blue Sky. And always like and subscribe to these videos. We're here trying to dig as deep as we possibly can for you. This is about serving the public. That's why we do this. This has been the Outcue.